Sweet. Yeah. So what are we actually going to be doing? Remember how Samay was talking about JavaScript being the kind of like animations and the movement of the website? So what we're going to be building is this. So it's just a small little thing, but it does kind of like make the site a little classier. It's a little typing effect when you get on the website. So yeah, so let's try this out. So I'm just going to take the thing that we were working on earlier. Here we go. So this is your script.js. Here is where the activity of your website lives. And the way that it gets connected is with this little tag right over here. It's called the script tag, and the source is what it is. So in this case, it's called script.js. So we connect it here. So now, how do we make it so that this gets typed? So what we can do first is we can make a variable. Let's just say name. And let's just take this text and put it here. This is so that we can refer to it and we have this variable in mind. A variable is basically just like a placeholder. Now this text can be referred to as name. Cool. Then what we can do is we're going to create a function. Now, what's a function? A function is basically a series of commands that you can call repeatedly. So the way that works is function. Let's just call it type name. We have these brackets here. I'll explain those later. And then these open curly braces. So now, anytime we call this, it runs everything inside of it. So now we need to get it so that we can put this text here sequentially. And the way that's going to work is that we're going to add one letter at a time, and then delay, and then add another letter. And we're going to keep doing that. So we first have to be able to put it on our website. We need some sort of connection. And we're going to do that with something called an ID. So back in our index.html, in the h1 tag, we're going to add an ID. So what is an ID? An ID is basically like an identifier. It allows us to select tags from JavaScript in HTML. So let's just call this name tag or something like that. So now this is a unique ID for this tag and refers to this in code. Does that all make sense so far? Does anyone have any questions? Sweet. Yeah. So now that we have this ID, we can actually refer to it in our JavaScript. How do we do that? So we're going to make another variable. Let's just say this is, I don't know, our name header, something like that. And then we're going to set this equal to that ID that we had earlier. So document refers to the whole document, and we're going to get element by ID. So an element, just to remind you guys, is the tag. So for example, that's h1, and we're getting it by the ID, which is name tag, as you can see here. So we're going to get this name tag. Cool. So now we have this function that basically sets this variable. So how does this work? Before we go further with the typing part of it, let's just see how this works. So we're going to do something that's very common in debugging, which is console log. So we're going to just console log this variable so that we can see what this is. And then one more thing is we haven't yet called this function. Now, what does it mean to call the function? To call the function is when you basically say, hey, document, you got to run this now. And we want to run this when the whole thing loads. So that's window.onLoad. And then we're going to set this equal to type name. Cool. So now when I run this, look at that. So we got this log. We got this something to happen. So that means that when this loaded, then this thing was run. Did that make sense so far?
Why is it that type name didn't have the open close parentheses when you called it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So that's kind of just more of a syntactical thing. With JavaScript, when you have these quote unquote event listeners, so it's an event that's happening, the load of the page, and it's listening for it. And when it happens, it does this function. And when you don't have these two brackets, it kind of refers to the whole function. When you do have those two brackets, it refers to the inside of the function. So in this case, we just need the whole function because we have to run a function on load.
I'm sorry, I missed the part where you included something in the index.html to link it to
Yeah, for sure.
ID equals name tag. That's all.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh. Cool.
So the reason this is there is so that we can select this. And as you can see, this allows us to connect it and we can see it here.
Oh, so name tag is something just that we're just naming it. We can say anything. Okay.
Right. It's totally arbitrary.
Could you also explain the console.log? What does that actually do?
Yeah, sure. So console.log, basically it puts it, it's like kind of like a debugging tool. So it puts it in your console. So if I were to open this in a new tab and we see this, what we can do to find the console is inspect element and then click on console. Now you see here, it prints out our tag. So this is where the console.log prints to.
Got it. Thanks.
Yeah. And in the case of REPL, it also prints here. This is like a separate console. Cool.
I'll just quickly add in, if you've coded in Python before, it's the exact same thing as print.
Yeah. Yeah, great point.
Hey, Varun, I have a question.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's say you wanted to pass something into the function. Can you do that if it's an event listener? Like
Yeah.
if you put something into type name, would that work or not?
That's a good question.
I actually just don't know. I just
Yeah, I honestly don't know either. Just try it and console log it and see what's up. Okay, no, doesn't look like it.
Okay, cool. So you can't pass anything in if it's an event listener.
Yeah, it seems like you cannot. There might be a way. We can probably look that up later.
Okay.
So are there different type of functions in JS?
What do you mean by different types?
Since this one is an event listener, are there other type of functions, or is that just a specific time when the function gets called, basically?
Yeah, it's the latter. So it's just a specific time when the function is called. So this is how you would define any function in JavaScript. It's just that we're calling it on load.
Okay.
Yeah. Sweet. Yeah, so now let's try to actually change what is in the header so that we can actually type into it. So the way we can do that is we'll need a variable. So the reason we need this variable I is because we need to be able to count through each of these characters. So we'll start at the 0th character, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. And so we need this I to keep track of where we are. So now what we're going to do is we're going to do name header dot inner HTML, and then we're going to set that equal to name header dot inner HTML plus name dot char at I. Now that was a lot of code at once, so let's break this down. So name header is what we had earlier. This was this right here, right? We've stored that in our variable. Inner HTML, that gets us what's inside here. So in this case, Sumay Chamdasani. Now we're going to set what's inside to what's already there plus another character. So so this will add the S to what's already there. Any questions so far? Awesome. Cool. And then we need just one more line. And that's so that we can keep going, right? So now we've added one character, but we need to keep adding characters. But we only want to do that after a certain amount of time. So there's this fancy function called set timeout, which basically calls a function after a certain amount of time. So in this case, we're going to call type name again, and we're going to do that in, let's just say, I don't know, 200 milliseconds. This is just in milliseconds. And let's just see what happens. Cool. So it's definitely adding something, but it's definitely not working as we hope. Right? So how do you actually stop this? Okay, cool. We'll just let that run. Cool. So let's just comment this out so that, yeah, okay. So why did that happen?
We had a quick question on when to use semicolons at the end of the lines. And Erica pointed out that line 1 didn't have a semicolon at the end. We found that syntax error.
Oh, good point. Yeah. So yeah, that's actually an error on my end. REPL is just nice sometimes and lets us do that. So you do need semicolons after every line. Cool. So why did that happen? So we kept calling type name, and we kept adding S to it because we did char at I. And what's I? I is 0. So how do we actually make it go to the next one and the next one and the next one? We have to increment I every time. So the way you do that is I++. So this is just shorthand for this. I equals I plus 1. Cool. And now we can uncomment this so that it works again. And let's try it again. Sweet. Now, we also have it twice, which is not what we want. So think about why we have it twice, just for a minute. So the reason we have it twice is because it's actually already there once here. So what we actually have to do is get rid of it here. So then when we run it, it just adds.
Awesome.
Sweet. So yeah, so that was quite a bit at once. So if you have any questions, like the rest of the time is pretty much just questions.
So basically, if you want a part of your web page to do something, then you tag it on the .html file, and then you do stuff with it on the script.js.
Yeah, that's like the basic workflow most of the time. Yeah.
I noticed that when I did this, even though there's no more character at I++, it keeps incrementing because I noticed that heading element gets printed out. Would there be a way to like kill the function, like make it stop running once it's printed out the entire name tag?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So the way we can fix that is we can actually put all of this in an if statement. So we can do this. So an if statement basically makes it so that what's after it only runs if the condition is true. So in this case, we want I to be less than name.length. So as long as I is less than the length of this, it won't keep going. So now, if you see, the curly braces are around everything we had before. So if we run this, then it prints out, and then it reaches the end, and it stops. So yeah.
How do we make it printed out twice?
Printed out twice? Like, what do you mean by that?
Like after it prints out, it starts again, as in a loop. Can we make it loop?
Ooh, okay, yeah, for sure.
I think a simpler way actually would be to just say, well, it's less than the name length times 2, right? If you just want it to be twice.
Yeah.
Maybe let's try it.
You can try that, right? Might need to close it in parentheses or something like that, but that should actually work because JavaScript knows PEMDAS.
So why didn't that work? So this is interesting because what happened is that I got greater than the length. So then there's nothing past here. So then it wasn't able to get more characters to print.
That's true.
So yeah, what we could do if you want to loop it is we could actually have an else statement here. So else, we make it so that I equals 0. So basically, I is going to keep doing this until it is name.length, and then we'll reset I. And then now it'll go back to here again and keep doing this. So, excuse me. So yeah, let's try that out. Okay, so that didn't work. I wonder why.
Is it because the place where you put the else? Maybe if you put the else in line with the if.
Maybe we can console log I to see what it is and debug it.
Yeah, good idea. What did you mean about where the else goes?
So right now, just look at your tabs. Your else is tabbed in, so it's actually under your if. Or if you meant that.
Oh, you mean like this?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I like my brackets inline. Some people like their brackets like this, but that's mostly personal preference. But yeah, so check it out. Now we're printing out I, and it looks like, oh, I see the issue. So in the else clause, we set I back to 0, but we never run type name again. So that's why it stopped at 19 and then just zeroed out. So what we can do is we can actually copy this and then put it here. So now when it gets set back to 0, we do run this function again and it goes back. So let's try that now. Cool. So now it's gonna just keep going and go forever. And we'll have too many submissions.
Hey, Varun, I think it might be valuable for you to go over the indexing for those who might not be familiar.
Yeah,
like
for sure.
how that works and where it starts and where it ends.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Cool. So for now, just so that we don't have too many smays, I'm just gonna comment this out so then it only runs once. And by the way, you can make this faster. So then maybe it looks more like typing. But yeah, to go over the indexing. So indexing is basically another word for like position. So the index of a string is the position of the string. So the way strings work is that basically this is position 0, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then so on. So 0 is S, 1, 2, 3, and so on. And that's how we're indexing or getting the position of each of these characters. So this char at gets the character at a certain position. So we start at 0, which is S, and we go forward. If anyone's still confused, I'd be happy to go over that again.
Do you want to explain how it knows how to stop?
Oh yeah, for sure. So the way it knows how to stop is because we have this if statement. So I is our counter variable, right? The position. And when we get to the length of this string, which is at the rocket ship, then we want it to stop. So only if I is less than the length do we run this. But if it's not, then we don't run any of it and it stops because I is too high. Cool. Any questions, any confusions, concerns?
I think I might have missed something earlier, but how do you get it so that even though it just runs once, like it doesn't start with, it doesn't have it like on the text already there and then it types it again afterwards?
I don't think I totally understood. So
because like now, when I run it, I see like my name already there, and then I wanted to type my name. It types it after my name's already there, so then I end up having it twice.
Yeah. So I think what you have is probably something like this, if I am understanding correctly. You have this happening?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So when this happens is because you actually already have your name in your index.html. So when you try adding to it in your JavaScript, it actually adds to what's already there.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. Cool. Any other questions? My REPL is bugging out a little, but okay, we're good.
Oh, I have a question that I had before that I don't know if this was on over, but so if you're familiar with programming, usually you would use a for loop to do this. So why didn't you have to do that for this?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. Sorry, I think I was on mute before, so everything I was saying.
Yeah, so hopefully that question makes sense to you. If you've done programming before, usually you use a for loop to run through all the characters. But in this instance, you just see that there's an if statement, right? But there's no for loop that's actually iterating through this. So that might be a little bit confusing.
Yeah, so for those of you familiar with programming, you might know what for loops are. And for loops are basically this way to do things repeatedly a certain number of times, which is almost exactly what we're doing here. But the difference is that rather than a for loop, we're actually repeatedly calling this function. So we go through, go this line, then we go back to the top. Line, back to the top. And this is really similar to how for loops work. And it's just like another way of kind of imitating a for loop. For context, a for loop looks like this. So for maybe int I equals 0. Whoops. I less than name.length I plus plus. So if you notice, there's actually a lot of similarities here. So first, var I, oops, there's a var. Var I here is exactly the same as var I here. I less than name length, exactly the same as what we did here. And then I plus plus, that's exactly what we did here. This could actually be replaced by equals I plus 1. And this is kind of like, I guess, a shorthand way of doing this. So this is a little confusing at first. So we can definitely talk about this more as we go. Yeah. Cool. Any other questions? Even if it's about the for loop, yeah, we can totally dive into that too.
Joshua has one for you. Do people have main functions in JavaScript?
That is a good question. I think, as far as I know, I think it's convention to like have one, but I don't think it's necessary. For context, a main function is like something that runs when you run a program. So in the case of Python, you would have a main function, which like when you run the Python script, it runs automatically. So similarly, I guess we are kind of doing that in a way where on load, we're running a specific function. So in a sense, this is almost like our main function. And correct me if I'm wrong, but like maybe that's a convention. I don't know if Samay, Maxim, you might have some input.
I'm out of my domain here. I couldn't tell you.
I was just helping someone else. Can you repeat that?
Yeah, so the question was, do we have main functions in JavaScript? And I was wondering if, I know, is that a convention or is that?
Yeah, it was more a question about convention because I know in C usually there's main functions and then you call the other functions by the main.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's not really, there's no such thing as like a main function in general, but you can have like similar object-oriented programming in JavaScript because you can have classes and stuff like that. So that can imitate stuff that's found in C and Python, but I don't think there's no like standard function that gets called every time. But you could think of the main function as the window.onload event listener. Basically, whatever is set equal to that, that is what's done. By default, even if you took out window.onload and you literally just had type name parentheses, everything would work as expected. But window.onload just formalizes that, just making it clear that this must be done when the page loads itself.
Gotcha.